With the pandemic being a game changer and schools requiring yet another vaccination, we wanted to find out which boxes should be ticked as we enter the 23-24 school year. Well, here to help us navigate the rules, regulations, and changes is Dr. Sara Ritchite, General Pediatrician with MUSC Children's Health. Great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with those changes, shall we?
Sure.
So what do parents need to know now?
Yes, so the good news is that the general vaccine schedule that pediatricians and primary care providers hasn't changed. So the one that we're following, it's the same. That's not any different. So if you're following annually with your pediatrician or primary care provider, you should be up to date.
Okay.
However, the subtle difference is when those vaccine series need to be completed for school. And so there's 4 vaccines that has changed for, and it's polio vaccine, hepatitis A vaccine, varicella or chickenpox vaccine, and Tdap, which is the tetanus booster.
And why are these changes taking place?
Well, so it is kind of in real, sort of a response to the pandemic to just give families a little bit more time to get caught up. So, so giving a little bit of grace with that.
Well, that's good to know. And then when we're talking about the COVID vaccination, so those are still required for children who are entering into school.
So that's a really good question. The school does not require the COVID vaccine, but we do highly recommend that.
Oh, okay. All right. Are there different types of COVID vaccinations?
Yeah. So so right now, the one that's kind of circulating is the bivalent COVID vaccine. So that's kind of covering those Omicron strains. But what we're anticipating in the fall is that we're going to have a monovalent COVID vaccine, and so that's kind of predicting which strain we think is going to be the most prevalent strain and trying to get ahead of it.
Yeah, you described it before we got started here as kind of like the flu.
Exactly.
They have to predict kind of what the next strain is going to look like.
It's exactly like that.
Okay.
Yes.
And speaking of the flu, do you recommend children getting flu shots?
Yes, absolutely. So come fall, we highly recommend the flu vaccine, and then of course also the COVID vaccine. We know that it prevents hospitalizations and death from flu or COVID.
Okay, let's take a few steps back because you had mentioned some of those vaccinations that we're all very familiar with. We've all gotten them, most of us have gotten them. But which vaccinations are required more or less? I know that there are certain exemptions, religious and otherwise, but what is typically administered during babyhood? So beyond maybe 9 months.
Yeah, so so kind of getting started with the vaccines, we have a pneumococcal vaccine. There's a Haemophilus influenza vaccine. There is hepatitis B. We get fully vaccinated for that. Polio, we start that, and then we also start the tetanus and pertussis protection with a DTaP, and so that one's for babies, and then the Tdap is for the older children. And
then you continue to get those boosters or those second administrations of the vaccination as we start getting closer to entering school.
Yes, exactly. And so as we get a little bit older at 1 and 4, we introduce the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and then also the varicella or the chickenpox vaccine.
Yes, okay. So at what point would you say that those vaccinations are on pause before the next round? Because I recall being in high school and we had to get various tests and vaccinations at that point.
Yeah, so so that's a really great question. So there's sort of a round at 4, and so kids are going to be up to date for preschool, and then there's another round around anywhere between 9 and 11 generally, and that's sort of when we introduce that HPV vaccine, the meningococcal vaccine, and then we shift from the DTaP to the Tdap.
Oh, interesting. So the HPV vaccination is actually much younger than what I thought. So this is not necessarily once you get into high school.
Yeah, it has moved earlier. That's a really good point. From over the years, it's moved earlier. It can be administered any time. So it could be teenagers, but you can do it. You can start it as early as 9. And the nice thing is that if you start it before age 15, it's a 2-dose series instead of a 3-dose series.
Okay. And up until what age can you get the HPV vaccination?
Oh, that's a great question. It's actually into the 20s. 20s.
Yeah, you're into
yeah,
your adulthood by that point, right? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But it is nice if you started before 15. Like I said, it's only a 2-dose series, and I do see the teenagers preferring fewer shots.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, you've given us a lot to chew on, a lot to think about. So for parents, this is really good information that do choose to vaccinate their children. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Sara, for joining us again.
Thanks
Good
for
to see
having
you.
me. Yeah.
We're back after this.